This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland. Watch it now on Prime Video.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. By now you may have heard that President Trump's ICE thugs detained a Tufts student under shocking circumstances. This is only the latest in a developing trend in which numerous students are being targeted for removal based in many cases on what appear to be their political associations and viewpoints. In a stunning moment on Thursday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated straight out that the administration is hoping to do this hundreds of times. We think this is a watershed moment. Rubio confirmed the scope and reach of Trump's deportation program and also confirmed that he's willingly carrying them out for Trump. Today, we're talking about all this with Shev Dalal Dahini, a senior official at the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Shev, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
So the latest example of this involves a student named Ruma Ozturk, a Turkish citizen who has a student visa for doctoral work at Tufts. She was detained by Homeland Security agents near her apartment in Somerville, Massachusetts. Video of the event is all over the internet. It's shocking. The ICE agents appear masked. Now, Homeland Security is claiming that she, quote, engaged in activities in support of Hamas, and that this was grounds for her visa to be revoked. Shev, what do we know about this situation so far?
Yeah, I think there's very limited information that is out there and what is supporting that determination that, she supported Hamas activities. All we know is that she was one of four co-authors of an opinion piece in the university's own newsletter calling for the university officials to support resolutions of the student body to recognize that there's a genocide happening in Palestine and also to divest from businesses that support Israel. So that is all the information that is currently available, is that she was an author, one of, I think, four authors of this editorial piece. We don't have additional information about other involvement that she has. She's a Turkish citizen on a student visa who has continued to comply with her status.
I'm going to read from a Washington Post article about this, which underscores your point, which is how little we know about why she's been detained and why she's being deported. The Washington Post says this: Ozturk does not appear to have been a leading figure in the pro-Palestinian protests at Tufts. She co-authored this op-ed that you discussed. The op-ed, written by 4 students and endorsed by 32 others, argued against the school's rejection of student Senate resolutions, which they wrote were an effort, quote, to hold Israel accountable for clear violations of international law. Now, that sure sounds a lot like speech to me. What do you think?
Yep, sounds like the First Amendment to me as well. And I think that that's what is really important here, is that we may not agree with what folks say, whether you're a U.S. citizen or you're a non-citizen. We don't always have to agree with what our opinions are, but our Constitution protects us all equally. Our Constitution has the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and that the Supreme Court has held its precedent for over decades, that it applies to U.S. citizens and non-citizens alike. And I think that's what's crucial. It's not about, what was stated in the op-ed or what her beliefs may be, but it's a question of whether or not someone is being detained and possibly deported because of their exercise of their First Amendment rights.
And we just know very little from the administration beyond this idea that she engaged in activities in support of Hamas, which could be just this op-ed for all we know. We don't know yet. But I want to stress that a number of other students are being targeted in this way. There's Yunseo Chung, a 21-year-old student at Columbia who's accused of attending demonstrations in support of Palestinians. She's lived here since she was 7 years old. There's Mahmoud Khalil and Badar Khan Suri, who were both legally present in the United States. Khalil was a legal permanent resident. Suri was here on a student visa. They both have wives who are U.S. citizens. The charges against all of them appear very thin, and a lot of this is blocked in court for now anyway. Shev, can you give us the rundown on these?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know much. Again, we don't have the evidence. The government hasn't come out with allegations other than saying that they are in some way associated with Hamas. But, it seems like it's more about their political statements and their participation in protest activity, or even their written opinions, similar to what happened with Miss Ozturk. Overall, what we can discern from the facts, right, is that these are all similar cases. These are all related. They're all being targeted for their political beliefs. And beyond that, we don't have any other evidence of what kind of nefarious activity they may have been participating in.
Right. I mean, we should stress that who knows, maybe the administration will produce proof of exceptional and extensive wrongdoing on the part of all these people, but they haven't yet, and they've been pressed over and over, and they still haven't. And by the way, as far as we can tell, the three we mentioned earlier, Yunseo Chung, Mahmoud Khalil, and Badar Khan Suri, are being targeted for removal under a statute that allows Rubio to revoke legal protections if he deems someone a foreign policy threat. We don't know for sure yet, but the latest one, Ozturk, might also be getting targeted under the statute. Again, we don't know for sure. But in all these cases, the evidence has been very thin that they constitute a threat. Can you talk about this provision that they seem to be using that empowers the Secretary of State this way?
Yeah, this is a really arcane foreign policy provision that, has not been used in, frequently, or has very rarely been used by the government. Really, it's about when the Secretary of State has reasonable grounds to believe that someone's presence, a non-citizen's presence, would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences to the United States, right? That would then make them deportable. But I think I would have to reiterate, it's about you have reasonable grounds to believe, right? That's the first piece of it. But the second piece is that they have serious adverse foreign policy consequences. And I'm not sure what a college student protesting, how that impacts our foreign policy. That also has not been articulated by the Secretary of State or the U.S. government.
Well, to your point, we've now set the stage to discuss Rubio's remarks at a press conference on Thursday. He talked about these efforts to deport students, and here's what he said.
We do it every day. Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa.
You're saying it could be more than 300
Sure,
people?
at some point, I hope we run out because we've gotten rid of all of them.
Shev, that's extraordinary. He says we do it every day. We might do it hundreds of times. And by the way, according to the Washington Post's John Hudson, Rubio was also asked what Ozturk did to merit losing her visa, and Rubio wouldn't say beyond writing that opinion column. What do you make of all that?
So, when we're talking about the authority, right, the Secretary of the statutes do give the Secretary of State authority to revoke a non-immigrant visa, right? But it's usually based on receipt of derogatory information, such as an arrest, and, or they're looking at somebody who didn't meet the requirement of admission at the time the visa was given, or where there's, again, derogatory information provided by another U.S. government agency. At this point, we don't have any of that information. We have no evidence that they have failed to maintain their status, that they were not entitled to their visas when they were given their visas. And the only derogatory information that is available is that people were expressing their political opinions or their right to speech. And that is what's being punished currently by the Secretary of State.
Spring is finally here. For us in DC, that means cherry blossom, warmer weather, and more breaking news each and every day. To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than the DSR Network. And there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than to become a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 40% off discount on sign-up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Yes, and Rubio's quotes today strike me as important for another reason. The legislative history of the statute in question that authorizes Rubio to do these removals on the basis that he determines that they're a foreign policy threat shows that Congress's intent was for it to be used sparingly and not primarily to target speech. So Rubio's claim that he's going to be doing this hundreds of times and every day, like whenever he sees someone he doesn't like walking down the street or whatever, sure seems to be at odds with that intent, doesn't it? Can you talk about this?
Yeah, so it's interesting when this provision, this foreign policy ground, was created by Congress, they expressly included a safe harbor provision, right? That explicitly prevented the removal of someone because of their past, current, or expected beliefs that would otherwise be lawful in the United States. So if a U.S. citizen said that, if that was a legal action, then it would be legal and they should be protected from removal if they're a non-citizen. The only way the Secretary of State can overcome that safe harbor exception is that if they personally determine that the person's presence would compromise a compelling U.S. foreign policy interest. And we don't know, again, what that compelling U.S. foreign policy interest. And in the past, and including in the legislative history, the examples that Congress gave about this compelling standard were pretty high. So one of the examples is that the individual's presence would actually violate a treaty or an international agreement. And here we have nothing to that level.
We certainly don't. And I think what the administration will try to say, and they have kind of said it, is that the administration's foreign policy goal here is to combat anti-Semitism. But it's all so vague. I wonder whether this stuff is legally vulnerable on vagueness grounds. Rubio is just basically saying these people constitute a serious threat to U.S. foreign policy and not saying much more than that. Maybe the statute itself is vulnerable, but all this seems very vulnerable to legal challenges, right? How do you see this unfolding?
I mean, it's already been susceptible to legal challenge, right? The statute has previously been found unconstitutional by a federal court because of the vagueness of the statute. So I think maybe you should be a judge. But literally especially when it's related to foreign policy, because nobody knows what our U.S. foreign policy is. It's not, oftentimes it's very secretive. It's, conducted at very close levels and covert manners. So it would be very difficult for people to know, especially at the time of when they got their visa, whether they would be engaging in something that would violate federal policy. I mean, you would want to consider that these individuals all got their visas and their permanent residence well before this administration announced what its foreign policy would be as it relates to anti-Semitism.
Just to be clear, when you say it was found unconstitutional by a federal court, what happened after that?
Well, I think the case got dismissed on other grounds. And so ultimately the law was not struck down because it was decided on other grounds. But I think it is definitely ripe for challenge, and it is being challenged currently. And so we'll see how this proceeds in the courts.
Chev, just to wrap this up, it really looks like Rubio is emerging as a central figure in Donald Trump's deportation regime. I think this is striking. Rubio, a decade ago, was really a heroic figure in the immigration debate in a certain respect. He stuck his neck out and very bravely argued for humane immigration reform and even spoke out powerfully about the humanity of migrants. But now he's emerging as central to some of the most questionable deportations that Donald Trump is doing. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the lack of respect for the law and for the Constitution in carrying out these mandates and these orders. And we know that Secretary Rubio, as you said, has had a better track record on these issues in the past, and really hope and implore that, there is some recognition of what our law requires, what due process means, and that we are not just targeting people who really aren't having any direct impact on our foreign policy or are not posing a threat to our national security just because they're voicing opinions on a college campus.
We really need Rubio to say more clearly what the grounds for doing these things really is.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if individuals are legitimately problematic and there's evidence that proves that, nobody wants them in the United States. But right now, all we have is their voice and their pen, and those are not actionable.
Certainly not. We really are hoping for better from Secretary Rubio. Chev Dalal-Dahini, thank you so much for coming on with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.